I'm Adam Rosenberg. Thank you so much for joining us here at Excelsior NYC's. And what time is it? It's really 12:03. It's a good time to soft intro. Um, Excelsior is a new community organization which is really just getting underway in the last couple of months. We grew out of a city, a sort of a nascent city council campaign earlier in the season for a candidate who got recruited by the New York State Department of Health. And that kind of put things on hold. And we ended up saying, well, there are all of these interesting issues we're involved in. How do we keep this rolling forward? How do we keep all of the things that we've learned and the connections we made providing value to the Upper West Side end of the city? And we've ended up incorporating a nonprofit community organizing group that's really about reaching out to various different groups of New Yorkers, trying to bridge gaps and bring people together to realize common ground and come up with pragmatic solutions. So in that vein, what we've been doing is we've been having a series of candidate panels for New York City Council District 6 and also for mayor. And Jeffrey Omura is one of the candidates who we've gotten to know through those venues and speaking one-on-one. And he has impressed many people, including myself and various members of Excelsior, as far as being a very serious, very professional, very interesting candidate, and someone who seems like he's making a big contribution to this race, and someone we're eager to make sure that as many people as possible get a chance to learn more about and speak with. Because Excelsior is a nonprofit, we're not going to be endorsing any candidates, but we do want to make sure that as many candidates as possible get a chance to reach out and interact with as many constituents in New York City, New Yorkers as possible. I also wanted to introduce and acknowledge on this call are some of my Excelsior colleagues, such as Andrew Ledval, and introduce you and see if there's any more that you'd like to add to this introduction before we hand it off.
It's great to see you, Andrew.
It's great to see you too. You know, you have actually impressed people across a very wide political spectrum in the course of your campaign and your appearances. And, you know, you've made a lot of really unifying points that have resonated with people who normally find nothing to agree with each other on. So after the panel that we had the other week, my father said that you were one of his favorite candidates on the panel. But of course, my father also thinks that Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez is on a mission to make America an unsafe place for the Jews. And yet, here you are. So it's been a very impressive campaign so far. And I just want to put my hat to you.
Sorry, I'm still on the phone with the governor, so I'm going to have to keep myself on mute, but please continue.
FYI, I just wanted to introduce, that was Adam Herbst. Adam Herbst is also one of the founders of this group, one of the leaders of the group, and he's the works for the governor. So when the governor calls, he's got to respond. So that's where he is right at the moment. But I'm saying let's mush into this conversation with Jeffrey. Jeffrey, I'd love it if why don't you take the floor, introduce yourself a bit, and then we'll entertain some questions and go from there. And I imagine a few more people will be floating in, floating out. And as I mentioned, this is being recorded. FYI.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you for what you all are doing here with Excelsior. So much of what you've talked about of bringing this community back together is I mean, those are the values that I'm bringing to this campaign. That's what we've been talking about over and over again. After a very difficult 4 years under the Trump administration, and then the last year under the pandemic here in the neighborhood, I've never seen it so divisive, and whoever wins this seat is going to have to find a way to bridge the divide and bring people back together. Let me tell you a little bit more about myself and why I got into this race. I am an actor. I've been a professional actor in the city for the last 15 years, but I'm also a labor organizer and an elected officer of my union, Actors Equity Association. And I got into organizing several years ago when I was working downtown at the Public Theater, making a take-home pay of about $400 a week after taxes, which you all know is not enough money to survive in Manhattan. And that was the situation for actors across the city, working at all of our great theaters, making rave reviews in the New York Times, bringing in millions of dollars to these theater companies, and barely scraping by, not being able to afford their basic living expenses. So I got together with my colleagues and we created a campaign called Fair Wage on Stage. That campaign gave our union leverage at the negotiating table to demand some real wage increases. And our union had never tried such a public campaign like that before. That year, we got up to 83% wage increases, breaking the record in our union's history and maybe in labor history. It's pretty groundbreaking to get an 83% wage increase in one contract negotiation. So when the terms of that agreement were announced, I was hooked as a labor organizer, and I realized that this is what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. It is my life's mission to ensure that everyone is paid a fair wage. That's how we're going to create a more fair and just society for everyone. So I ran for a seat on my union's council, and I've been governing from the inside ever since. We've had a number of successful campaigns from within the union, including leading our first strike in over 50 years, where we got profit participation into a contract, which is game-changing for our industry. And things were going really well for the union and for our industry as a whole. 2019 was a record-breaking year for Broadway, for instance. And then the pandemic hit in March of last year and shut down our entire industry and put all 50,000 of our members onto the unemployment rolls. So it's been an extraordinarily difficult year for everyone I know who's been facing unemployment and with uncertain job prospects in the future. But more than just the unemployed workers, the arts and culture sector is one of the greatest economic engines for this entire city. So last summer, we realized that we were getting left out of the conversation at every level of government with the relief talks. So we started organizing a new campaign called Be an Arts Hero. And we organized the national arts community to collectively lobby Congress for direct arts relief. And we sat down with over 60 US Senate offices with a really simple message. And that's, this is the number of jobs that are created in your state because of the arts. This is the exact economic impact of the arts in your state. And suddenly both Democrats and Republicans start perking up as they realize that the arts isn't this fun thing that we get to if we have extra time and money left over. It's an essential driving force of the economy everywhere. And it's true nowhere more than right here in New York City. So that's why I'm running. I've been lobbying the city council for arts funding for the past several years. I got to know the arts advocates that we have. And the problem is they're all term limited. And after this election, there may be no one left to advocate for the arts at a time when we need it most, at a time when the city needs it most. So I'm running to get the more than 300,000 arts workers back to work, to get the 65 million tourists back into the city who support our hotels and restaurants and retail, because that's how we're going to get the whole economy on track again. And it's also how we're going to make this an exciting place to live again. We lost a lot of people who moved out of the city in the last year, and we've got to get them back. Here locally in the neighborhood, I'm focused on supporting our small businesses who are struggling and addressing housing and homelessness, which has probably been the #1 issue over the last year. So as I mentioned, I'm looking to bring this community back together. And I've been trying to do that by talking to absolutely everyone. Not everyone is happy with that. Some people see talking to others that you disagree with as I don't know, an act of betrayal. I think it's essential. I think that is the only way we're going to bring this community together. If you can't move anyone closer to your worldview if you cut them out and stop talking to them. So I know what I believe in. I know what my values are. I know why I'm running and what I want to accomplish. But I can only accomplish those things through conversations, through getting to know each other, through getting to know our neighbors, through getting the community behind me. That's what's made me a successful labor leader. And I think that's what will make me a successful city council member. So Andrew, I'm thrilled to hear that your father liked what I had to say the other night. This past weekend, I was endorsed by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I was very proud to receive that endorsement. She's a movement builder. She's a really bold thinker. We agree on a lot of things. I don't know if we agree on everything. I would like to address what your father's concern about Israel, because, you know, as an Asian American man, I have been very nervous walking down the street over the past year with the rise of anti-Asian hate crimes. And I believe the current cycle of anti-Asian violence was created by President Trump through his rhetoric, the way that he talked about China. That when you scapegoat a country like that, it's very easy to start believing that anyone who may be Chinese is somehow responsible for the virus. And I think we have to be very careful with our language and our rhetoric. And I would say the same thing is true about Israel. We can disagree with the Israeli government's policies, but I don't think it's ever appropriate to disparage Israel or the Israeli people, because that's when I think that's why we've seen this rise in anti-Semitic violence over the last few months. So we've got to be very specific with our language. You know, there are certainly policies that policies of the Israeli government that I might disagree with, but you know, I'm traveling to Israel for the first time in July. I've wanted to my entire life. I plan to see the whole country, and you know, that's how I feel about the situation. And even, you know, I imagine. Well, I hope I meet people I disagree with there, and I look forward to those conversations. I don't know if I'll invite those conversations, but I won't be afraid to have them.
Virtually impossible not to meet someone you disagree with in Israel.
That's true. So I'd love to turn it back over to you all, and I'm sure you may have questions.
Sure. So I guess thank you for introducing yourself, and you seem to have this incredible wealth of experience as a union organizer, and that's really, really wonderful, especially because we're going to have this massive economic recovery, and we definitely need people who are looking out for workers' rights as the businesses open up again. We talked about issues with anti-Semitism and with anti-Asian violence, but this is sort of the penumbra for the bigger problem, which is that there's violence as a whole in the city has been rising, crime has been rising, right? And this, you mentioned, again, the issue with tourism and the issue with rebuilding the businesses, and these are also, you know, quite related problems, right? So overall, my question is, the general rise in crime and violence, especially in the Upper West Side, which a lot of Upper West Siders have linked to their choice to, you know, for their exodus, right? How should we treat this? Is it just a symptom of the economic problems? Do we need more police presence? What's the constructive solution to this issue?
Sure. I mean, it's so complicated because we're in the middle of a pandemic still, and a mental health crisis. And we saw protests last summer where, you know, the protesters were asking for the police to back off. I've been sitting down with our local police leaders because I think, as I've said before, the way we move forward is by having conversations and getting to know each other and building relationships. And what they tell me is we're trying to respond to what the protesters asked for. And the protesters said, hey, we want less police presence. And so the police backed off a little bit. And I think there are places where they backed off too far. I live across the street from Lincoln Center, where I regularly see 5 police cars parked out front. And I don't think, in a time of limited resources, that that's a good allocation of resources. I think the police should be walking around the neighborhood, getting to know people. When I'm elected, I'll be bringing them into community board meetings and PTA meetings and getting to know the community so that they understand what the public safety concerns that we have. And I look forward to having a constructive relationship with them. To address public safety as a whole, I think, it's complicated because we've got to also address the root causes of crime. In a lot of cases, it is poverty. So will greater police presence on the street bring down crime? In some cases, yes. But if the poverty still exists, if economic inequality is just getting greater, well, that's only going to contribute to more crime. So we have got to do both. We've got to have constructive relationships with the police. We've got to address the root causes of poverty by investing in communities, by ensuring everyone has access to quality education, to make sure everyone has jobs. We've still got 12% unemployment. Kids have been out of school for the last year, and so there are just people with a lot more idle time on their hands. Simultaneously, we have more guns on the street than we have ever had before. And there's no easy solution to that. So why have we experienced more shootings over the last year? Well, the pandemic, the mental health crisis, too much idle time, and way too many guns on the street. So I'm not interested in returning to a stop and frisk policy because I think that was incredibly destructive to entire communities. But right now, the CDC is exploring public health policy alternatives to addressing gun violence, addressing it from the perspective of this is a public health problem because people are dying because of guns. How can we research this? How can we get into communities, provide them resources, provide them education to stop the shooting? But until we have some sort of national gun control, guns are going to continue to flood into the city illegally.
So Jeffrey, I was listening to that for a second, and I apologize for having to kind of continue to work here. The whole reason I didn't run for city council is because I'm working for the governor, so I'm doing my job instead of challenging you. The only thing I'll disagree with what you just said is that people are not getting killed by guns. People are getting killed by people who carry guns. That's the only thing I would just modify on what you just said. Other than that, I agree, what you were saying. So sorry, go ahead.
Just to ask, you addressed all of these issues, and you mentioned the mental health crisis, right? And that seems to be another one of these root problems where you have a lot of people who are in poverty or homeless and who have mental problems. And the city has kind of bungled its attempts to help these people, to put them up somewhere in a hotel, or essentially to give them the relevant services that they actually need. And the question is, a lot of people on the Upper West Side have been wondering, what do we actually do with this problem? How do you handle this mental health crisis that's going on?
Right. Well, right now we have a Department of Homeless Services that we pour money into. And I don't think the city council really has a good grasp on where that money is going and who is profiting off of it. But it's certainly not meeting our needs. We're not seeing the results from the billions of dollars that we're pouring in. So I think the problem is that the system depends on these temporary shelters. It's temporary by design. And so people cycle in and cycle out, and they end up back on the street. And then the alternative is they commit a crime and they're arrested and they're thrown in Rikers. And so either way, we're not addressing their mental health needs. To address housing and homelessness, we're going to need a massive expansion of housing across the city to bring down the cost of housing for everyone, because the supply of housing in the city hasn't kept up with demand. And that's why so many families, the majority of the homeless population is made up of families and kids, and they've been priced out of the bottom. And we need housing to give them a permanent place to live. But also for those who are dealing with mental health issues and substance abuse issues, I don't think it's appropriate to leave them on the street. And congregate living shelters are also not a great solution. We need permanent supportive housing, housing first, where you have access to mental health, substance abuse services, and eventually job training to create stability and get back on their feet. And every neighborhood in the city is going to have to step up and help shoulder that burden. The Upper West Side has a lot of shelter beds already, and we need everyone. We need every neighborhood to help out here. And then we're like I said before, we've got to address the root causes. We've got to get to people before they enter the criminal justice system, before it's too late, and that's in schools. And so we need more social workers at every single school in this city, especially as we're bringing kids back in the fall after this lost academic year. We don't even know how many kids have just fallen out of the public school system, but that right there is we're going to see the repercussions in terms of mental health, in terms of crime and public safety, and probably in terms of teenage pregnancy. So we got to get kids back in school as soon as possible, and they need support in the school buildings.
Jeffrey, I was hoping to jump in and explore another area, and I encourage everybody to have questions ready. And something that's been impressing me about your campaign is that you are an advocate for LGBT inclusion, rights, community. You have a deep background in that area. I know this has been it's been a period in the last few years when there's been a big pendulum sort of swing pushback on a lot of the gains that have been made in those areas in the last few years on a national level. I know that it's an area where there's a lot of contention in the press and in various ways. And I would love to get a better sense from you about where you're coming from, and also given the powers and the limitations of the role of the city council, what you think you can do and the contributions you could make and policy issues you could pursue from that seat.
Yeah, that's right. And all of the LGBT representatives that we have on the New York City Council are term limited, just like the arts advocates and like the Asian American City Council members. They're all term limited. So I think representation matters. We need people who wake up in the morning thinking specifically about how they're going to address the needs of the LGBT community, of the Asian American community. That's why representation matters. So I'm going to be focusing on two different things for LGBT policy: health and housing. My own health needs as a gay man in this city over the last 15 years have often not been met. I've gone to doctors where they don't ask the right questions. So of course I can't properly be treated when they don't even know what questions to ask. Or I have a lot of friends who don't have health insurance, and so they can't have their basic health needs met. We have same-day STI testing at one clinic in Chelsea that should be available citywide. We have the means to eradicate HIV, to eliminate all new transmissions, and yet we still see hundreds of new transmissions every year in this city. So the city council is going to have to work with the New York City Department of Health on education campaigns and on making sure that they have the resources they need to get into those communities to address those health concerns. And then housing, LGBT youth are they're still kicked out of their home at disproportionately high rates and experience homelessness at disproportionately high rates. And so we've got to make sure that everyone has a place to live. So those will be my two priorities.
Thank you. I'm wondering if we've got some other questions or issues coming from other people in the room issues about, well, any of the other topics going on in this race in the city council and the city.
Well, you know, I'm thinking of the right way to phrase this, but we're fresh off a meet and greet with someone for borough president, and the question of the community board is a bit of a raw nerve for some people on the Upper West Side. And as the city council person for CD6, you have a role in who gets named to CB7. Where do you see the gaps in terms of who's represented on CB7 and where CB7 is really not representing the community?
Yeah, I mean, as I said before, representation matters, and so the community board should reflect the diversity of this neighborhood, and that, you know, we've got to think about it intersectionally, in many different ways. But specifically, I want to make sure that our NYCHA residents have more of a voice on our community board. You know, it's hard to address the concerns of NYCHA. Right now, I believe there are only two representatives from NYCHA on the community board. I'd like to see some more. Also, you know, I've got to look into this, but I can't figure out why the community board voted against allowing food delivery workers to use bathrooms at restaurants. The city council is going to have to address that, but until it does, I would love for the community board to take another look at that.
I wasn't even aware of that one. That is a very strange position to take.
Another question. You mentioned that you've been having regular dialogue with, you know, police, all over the Upper West Side, and the question is, a lot of police officers have kind of been uncomfortable with the recent bail reform that's happened all over New York, and have kind of pointed the finger at that as one of the things that prevents them from, you know, exercising, doing their job essentially. And it's been a touchy subject in that whenever a lot of police chiefs were asked to be interviewed about it, it's always kind of held off at a distance. It feels like it's becoming a third rail as it's sort of an entrenched policy. And I guess I'll ask, what's your take on the recent bail reform?
Yeah, I think the bail reform was absolutely well-intentioned, and it's working in some ways and not working in other ways. And I think we have to be prepared to admit when we're wrong, or when a policy that we have championed is not working the way that we intended it to. So I've talked to, I've heard the same thing from police officers. I've talked to people here in the district who say that, their teenage son was mugged. And when they went to the police about it, the police said, well, there's nothing we can do, because if we pick up the perpetrator, they'll be back on the street in a few hours. I don't think, I don't think that's the way it should be. I don't think bail reform is working. If that was the intention, well, then I can't stand behind that. I think when people commit crimes, and especially when repeat offenders commit crimes, we have to be able to get them off the streets.
I have a question also concerning police and crime and so on. So Ms. Ocasio-Cortez likes Sweden. I happen to know Sweden a little bit. And one of the things I know about Sweden is that the police there are extremely well paid, extremely well trained, much better trained than most American police people. I don't know whether you remember the story that happened a few years ago when there were two Swedish policemen on the New York subway, and there was some sort of situation and they managed to defuse it totally elegantly and non-violently and without arms, of course, which they weren't carrying. So my question in the spirit of Sweden would be whether the slogan shouldn't be fund the police instead of defund the police.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. I have to admit, I'm not I'm not an expert on the Swedish police force or their training, but I'm proposing 3 specific things to reform the police, to make sure that we have a better police force. I want to renegotiate the police contracts and make sure we've got accountability and oversight in those contracts. I want advice and consent of the city council required for the confirmation of the police commissioner, so we can make sure that we get accountability and oversight into those contracts. And I believe that the Civilian Complaint Review Board should have the authority, once they've investigated police misconduct, to actually do something about it. And people, some people have asked me, well, how are you going to get the police unions to agree to these contract negotiations, to the terms that I would want to bring forth in these contract negotiations? And to your point, well, maybe we could pay them better. And as a labor officer myself, I believe everyone should be paid a fair wage. I think the police wages should be competitive so that we're attracting the best people. So I like that idea.
Any other questions or comments or observations?
This is Lorena Marus. Hi, how are you? Thank you for having us and for setting up this forum. It's really great to hear from you, Jeffrey. My question is, as you, I'm also a performer. And one of the things that has been really affecting everyone in the city, I'm sorry, I was exercising a little bit, so I'm hyperventilating here. The thing is, a lot of people in the city are struggling with transportation. We know that the subway is being unsafe, and a lot of people started buying cars, I would say, including me, myself. It's very hard to find parking in the city. It's also very hard to find bikes. City bike is out there. And more than often is you get to the docks and there are no bicycles available. And then when you're lucky and you get one, then it's very hard to find a spot to drop it off somewhere else. And added to that, we are dealing with a situation where in order to help the restaurants to come afloat during the pandemic, the outdoor restaurants were created, which is amazing. A lot of people loves it and it's really wonderful. But at the same time, the regulations have been, my point of view is a little off, where restaurants are occupying several lanes of traffic in avenues such as Amsterdam Avenue, and where we see that suddenly if you drive around between times the rush hours, there's only one lane for driving around because 2 lanes, the 2 extremes, are taken by restaurants. Then the 2 following lanes are taken by trucks and delivery, different cars, trucks, buses. So there's only 1 lane left in the middle. That's causing a lot of traffic in the Upper West Side. I never experienced this traffic before the pandemic, and now it's really, really getting out of control once people came back. And riding a bike is virtually impossible. What is your take on that? What are the plans for the city council, specifically for the Upper West Side? Are you planning to continue approving these restaurants to be out there, and which is great in some way, but in the other hand, it's affecting transportation and for so many people. So it's hard to get to work, it's hard to get to schools. Trash trucks are occupying so many of the streets in the mornings. And I really think that that's really terrible because that's also adding into the pollution in our city. And there's a lot of studies that say, and proposals in the city by different members in the government that they want to take cars out of circulation in the city. But reality is that many of us need a car. Many of us need a bike. Many of us commute far away. And it's very hard to keep up with the cost of transportation on a daily basis, except for subway. But if subway is not safe, what do we do? What is your take? What are you going to do? Are the regulations for the restaurants going to be improved? What do you think?
Yeah, so I hear you, because I've heard that a lot from people who are concerned about subway safety. I ride the subway every day myself, so I have not personally experienced that the public safety issue on the subway, but I know a lot of people are concerned about it. And there was a forum a few weeks ago for the community here in District 6 that was attended by Police Commissioner Shea, and he was specifically asked the same question. And his response was, yes, we are hearing more stories about subway violence because the press is covering it more. It's getting a lot of attention in the headlines. And yes, if you look at the statistics, violence on the subway has actually gone up. But he said, that's because we now have more police on the subway, and it's the police. The violence is actually inflicted on the police. That's what accounts for the rise in the violent crime statistics on the subway. That's what Commissioner Shea said. I'm inclined to listen to him. I think as our economy starts moving again, and as more people start riding the subway again, I think we're going to start feeling safer. Same thing with our streets. We're going to start feeling safer when there are just more people on the street, especially late at night. I've heard a lot of people say that they feel less safe walking the street at night, which is why I want to light up our streets. If our streets are too dark, if there are too many vacant storefronts, we can work with property owners to light those up, to give people a greater sense of security. But the Transit Workers Union has been very vocal about needing more security on the subway. And I think we should listen to them, because they're the ones down there all day long. They understand their security needs much better than anyone else does. And I think we should listen to them. To address your second question about the restaurants and parking, I've loved what's happened over the last year with the outdoor seating, and I'm certainly a proponent of that. But we've got to take the parking needs of this community into consideration. It's why I've proposed a residential parking permit system. Every other major city in this country has one, and I don't know why New York has avoided one for so long. We're about to implement congestion pricing in New York City, and congestion pricing will begin at 60th Street. So all the commuters who are coming in to work in Midtown, I'm afraid, will be very tempted to use the Upper West Side as a parking lot. I want to make sure that we are prioritizing parking for people who live here, and that's the intention behind the residential parking permit system. We would keep it affordable enough for people who live here to afford the parking spaces, and we make it much more expensive for anyone who's commuting in. I'm not sure if that addresses all of your concerns. There may be some opportunities to redesign our streets. A lot of traffic problems are design problems. We have software and technology that can improve traffic that we're not currently using. There's a software system called Transit Signal Priority that our bus system uses, but only at some intersections. And this software is installed at the intersections, and it senses when a bus is getting near, so that the traffic lights can turn green and the bus can pass right through. If we installed that across the city, it would be much faster to ride buses everywhere in this city. So we've got to look at technology. We've got to look at design for how we can improve traffic.
Jeffrey, I have a question. I know we only have about 15 minutes left, so I want to just I have one quick question, and then maybe we can get one or two more questions before we wrap up for the day. My question is simply, ranked choice voting. Right now, if people rank you first, who are you advising those that do so to rank second on their ballots, and why?
Sure. So this year we've got ranked choice voting, which is really exciting because it requires candidates to talk to more voters. They can't just turn out their base. They have to talk to everyone. 8 years ago, when Helen Rosenthal won this Democratic primary, she won with just 27% of the vote. Ranked choice voting requires that the winner receive at least 50% to win. So all you have to do as a voter is rank your preferences. And if no candidate receives 50% in the first round, they eliminate the lowest vote getter, and your vote, if your candidate, who was your first choice, is eliminated, your vote then goes to your second choice. So as a voter, all you have to do is rank your preferences. In order for me to win, I not only have to turn out a whole lot of first choice votes to make sure that I survive for the subsequent rounds, but I have to be everyone else's second or third choice vote. And I very much hope that I am. I've partnered with Sarah Lind. Sarah is another progressive in the race, and I think we share a lot of the same values, and we share some policy ideas. I think she's got a really smart rezoning plan for the West 50s that if I'm elected, I'll be happy to take up that zoning plan. And she's got some really great ideas to revitalize the stretch of Broadway between 72nd and 110th Street. So I'll be asking my supporters to rank her second, and she'll be asking her supporters to rank me second. I was honored when Gail Brewer also named me as her second choice. And I've had some great conversations with Maria. And I've gotten to know her. I think she's very concerned about about public safety and about addressing homelessness. And those are certainly issues that I take seriously and have developed extensive platforms around to address. So I hope to be everyone's second choice.
Thanks, Jeffrey. So I just want to open up for one or two more. We only scheduled to 12:45, so I just want to open up for any last one or two questions from the group. Anyone? Andy, you have a question?
Jeffrey, would you like to share your thoughts on the mayoral race?
Sure. Yeah. Well, it's really tough, and I haven't decided for sure yet, but I'm really leaning towards Catherine Garcia. There are a lot of things that I like about Bill de Blasio. I'm grateful for universal pre-K and 3K. That is, a game-changing program. But I think the number one complaint of his administration over the last 8 years is that things just didn't seem to be getting done. And nobody knew, emails weren't responded to, phone calls weren't picked up, meetings weren't happening on time. And I want someone who's going to be a really good manager, someone who can get in there from day one and start reorganizing the city government to make it more efficient, to save us money, because we're going to have some really tough budget negotiations coming.
I'm sorry, Jeffrey. I need to jump off for my call now.
Oh, sure.
So you guys keep talking. I'm going to jump off. Just wanted to say goodbye and thank you very much. And, thanks for engaging with Excelsior. On behalf of Excelsior, I appreciate you coming and, speaking with our group. And, whatever happens, we really hope you continue to engage with Excelsior beyond, the primary and extending beyond that. We're very eager for, you to come and work with us in whatever capacity. We really admire you. And, I personally really like you. So want to thank you and wish you the best of luck. I'm going to jump off, but everyone else, please continue.
All right. Thanks, Adam. It's great to see you. So as I was saying, I'm looking for a good manager, someone who from day one is going to be able to help reorganize the city government. I think that's what New York City needs right now coming out of this pandemic. So I'm leaning towards ranking Catherine Garcia first. But we'll see. We've got 14 days left.
All right. Jeffrey, thank you so much for joining us. We're glad that we were able to introduce you to some more of the people who have been active with Excelsior. And, it's a continuing conversation. We're really excited for your rise in the neighborhood. And we hope to continue engaging with you and to work with you on making the Upper West Side and New York the best place they can possibly be.
Well, the
Oh.
feeling's mutual.
Thanks again, Jeffrey.
Oh, thank you. And I just want to say, if you liked what you heard, please get involved, because we've got 14 days left, and we're going to win this by having more conversations with more voters than any other campaign. And we have an army of volunteers working for us, but we need more. So please go to jeffreyomura.com/volunteer and sign up.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you for joining us, Jeffrey, for everything you're doing in the neighborhood, and the messages you're bringing and the representation that you're bringing. And I look forward to seeing more of you soon.
Great. Thank you so much. Have a great night, or a great day, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you everybody for coming.